Hi, my name is Reina Hardy. I'm Senior Writing Coordinator at Prompt.com. We're a company that works with college counselors, both independent and in schools, to help them provide feedback to their students on the essays, so that we're taking that portion of their job off their plate. We also do essay management software. And I train our essay specialists, manage the queue, make sure that everybody's getting quality feedback in a timely manner. I've been working for Prompt for about 2 years. I started as an essay specialist myself, so that means I've looked at definitely hundreds, probably thousands of college essays during the time that I've been working for them. I came to Prompt through kind of an interesting route. I'm actually a playwright. I did my undergrad at Columbia in New York, and I was a Missioner Fellow at UT Austin for my MFA, again in playwriting, which is, you know, what I do. And that's what happens when I'm not at Prompt. I've mostly produced just in the US, but I do have a play going on in Australia right now. And I think that gives me a really good perspective on how to tell story and create character through essays.
Thank you. Hi, morning. I'm Sandeep from University of Essex. I'm the director for their South Asia operations. I've been connected to the higher education industry for over 12 years now. We started the office for Essex in 2013. That means over the last 6 years, I've looked at about thousands of essays and guided these students across the board. Prior to starting University of Essex in India, I was with the Times, Education Times, and again, a thorough background in journalism and researching about universities and how students actually make decisions on studying abroad is one of the fortes that I have. Thank you, and I look forward to getting questions from you.
Thank you. Hello everyone, my name is Aamir. I head the Career Guidance Center for the Shiv Nadar Schools. I've been in the education sector for more than 7 years now, with Shiv Nadar for more than 5 years. I helped set their Career Guidance Center, and now we have 3 schools, and I'm looking after the CGC in all the 3 schools. Typically, we have about 25 to 30% students going abroad. So for them, we do everything in-house at the moment for these students, and we've got counselors in each of our campus with a person assisting them with data entries.
Thank you. So I think one of the biggest difference is is what is it that the universities are looking for. So as high school counselors, when you're making students apply, a lot of students apply to both the US and the UK. And I think the bigger difference around the essays is A, when they start. So to start with, of course, the admission cycle for both of these countries started at a different time. If you're applying for certain art or conservatoire courses in the UK or Oxbridge programs, then students have a deadline of October of that year. So that means they almost start a year in advance if they're applying to top UK universities. If they're applying to the US, then they of course give their SATs almost when they're in grade 11, so which is a year before that, and then the application starts. So it sort of starts with the kind of time they get initially to write it. The second biggest difference, again, is the number of essays which they have to write. So for UCAS, the application process is is comparatively, I think, simple, because UK universities focus equally on the students' grades and on essays. So you go on the UCAS website, there is a simple essay form, a format which a student can use, and there's a tool which they can use to sort of fill up their details, and it creates a PDF at the end. So that sort of tool, that single essay goes to all of the main 5 choices. So what the students are usually covering is a general idea of why they want to study in a particular department. So for example, someone wants to study a BBA or business management. So they start writing about their curiosity to study a business management, start building stories around why is it that they got interested in studying a business management course, and their current achievements, along with what is it that they are going to do about 5 to 10 years down the line after studying a business management course. So that's a UCAS process, and usually it's 1 or 2 essays in the UK. So there's going to be there will be a requirement for a single essay for sure from UK universities, but most universities have now started offering scholarships at an undergraduate level. So they often require students to write special scholarship essays. So the higher limit for the number of essays which most UK universities would require would be about 2. And that compared to the US is very different, because US, on an average, a student writes between 15 to 16 essays, specific essays for specific universities. And I think the biggest difference, again, is that because a student writes more number of essays for US universities, they can talk about individual universities, and they can talk about why is it that they are a better student for that particular university. So they can focus on, so most universities in the US, if a student is applying to, let's say, a 10 university choice, most of these 10 universities will have a different entry criteria. And in all probability, he would be applying either to the same department, but different courses within these different universities. So he can tweak each of these essays and talk about why are they interested in that particular course, and what is the motivation behind studying that particular course. I think the other really interesting thing for universities to see is how they are able to reflect their personality and the school and the curriculum system in which they've studied. So if someone's come from an IB or an A-level or a CBSE school, we understand that a lot of CBSE schools focus on merit, they focus on academics. So how is it that a student uses that as an advantage, where he can talk about topics which are related to his area of study. So to give you an example, if again, let's take the example of a BBA course. If someone's applying for a BBA course, they are merit holders. They worked really hard throughout the school system. Their average percentages are high. They meet entry criteria, and of course, if they've scored a 90-95 in CBSE, it takes a lot of hard work to sort of get there. They haven't, of course, for the last couple of years focused on extracurriculars. So, but small little things like participating in debate competitions, being a part of an annual day, annual group, which of course portrays their personality towards team management, event management. All of those things can be sort of covered. And I think essentially, I would not be right to say that the US application process is far more complicated, but I think the number of essays are certainly higher in the US, and for UK it's much less. And if a student is applying to the UK and not applying to Oxbridge or art conservatoire courses, then they've got, I think, more time to write the essays, where in the US they have to certainly sort of start the process about 12 months in advance before the deadline. Cheers.
Thank you. So when we look at a student's essay, we're looking for a couple of things. First of all, it has to feel honest. It has to actually portray who that student is. And sometimes students struggle with that. Other students will struggle with being too honest, so it's a balance. We're looking to have the student portray the best version of who they are. And the best version of who they are is someone who's going to be successful in college. That's the entire purpose of this piece of writing. And for students, this is a little unusual. Previously, they may have written essays that are about history or about literature. It's the first time that they have to talk about themselves in a way that will convince a reader that they are going to be successful in college. So it's a very purpose-driven writing that's totally new to them, and it's about a very sort of tender topic themselves, so it can be hard. So when we work with students, and we do this, I've done this through seminars, and we also do it through our content modules, which are brainstorming exercises that we take them through on our software. We think about 5 qualities that will prove you'll be successful in college. And what's kind of interesting about these is that the qualities, they have a lot of overlap. It's more about motivation than it is about results, if that makes sense. So what we always think about is, we think about drive. Drive is, wanting to succeed, wanting to keep working, grit, This is something that a lot of students understand is supposed to be important, so a lot of them will write about it, even if it's maybe not necessarily the best thing for them to write about. Then there is intellectual curiosity, your passion, your love for something that you do just because you want to do it. That's another thing that will lead you to succeed in college and beyond. There's also contribution, wanting to contribute to your community, wanting to give back, right? So that can have some overlap again with drive, but it's kind of where that desire comes from. There's also initiative or leadership. That's the desire to take ownership of things, to lead, to start something, or to make something better, right? And again, that can be related to something like intellectual curiosity, where you're doing something because you love it, because you're passionate about it, but the motivation is coming from something different. And then finally, we talk about diversity of experience, which means what's that thing that makes you unique, that sets you apart, that the other students don't have, that allows you to bring a perspective to the school that no one else can bring. And when we talk about this with the students, I think it helps them to realize that they don't have to, they don't have to say, oh, I have lots of drive, I always give back to my community. They don't have to be dutiful in that way. They can be who they are, but again, the best version. So that leads me to topics. And we always try to get them to think of stories from their lives that will prove what these, that will prove they actually have these qualities, right? Because if you want to prove that you'll succeed in college, you can show your marks, right? Your scores, your test scores. That's really straightforward. But how do you prove to a college that you have intellectual curiosity? How do you prove to a college that you like to give back to your community? You have to tell stories about yourself. You have to tell stories about yourself in a way that shows that you, A, of all did something, and B, of all, what your motivation was behind it. So essay topics can be anything, as long as they show these qualities and they show personal growth. So there's a lot of, it's almost easier, I think, to talk about quote unquote bad topics than it is to talk about good topics, right? The pitfalls that students will fall into, in my experience, are writing about something that they think is the biggest, most dramatic event in their life that doesn't have much to do with their actual life. So maybe they went on a mission trip for 1 week, and this was like, oh, so different from what they're normally used to. And they're like, this was a big deal, I'm gonna write about it. But it didn't really change the way they thought, didn't change the way they acted, and it didn't continue to have impact on their life going forward. It tends to end up being a bad topic. I would say, in my experience, that's my topic. That is that I've had the least success with making special. Right. Sometimes students will fall into pitfalls with music or drama or athletics, and that's not because there's anything bad about the topics. It's more that the students will kind of get wrapped up in saying, you know, for athletics, they'll say, I had to learn to work hard, and they're not going a step beyond that to show what their unique insights are and what actually drove them, because they've been told that working hard is good and they want to portray that they're working hard, and it doesn't come off as true to who they are, and it's not convincing to the college. So I think those are the pitfall topics, and then you also will, I think, we spoke about this earlier, fall into the occasional topic that just straightforwardly portrays the student in a bad light, and you have to sort of steer them away from that. Did you want to bring that up as the news?
A couple other examples of poor topics are talking about your girlfriend or boyfriend. You know, theater drama typically can be kind of repetitive. Stories about good grades, bad grades. Now, none of these mean that students can never write an essay about them, but they typically tend to not provide what we're looking for in helping us better understand the student. There was a great example today that came out in the International Higher Ed, published about New College of Florida, and their readers were flagging students with mental illness and physical disabilities and sending that group to an additional readers, and some of those students were not getting admitted even though they had the same qualifications to be admitted. Terrible, terrible story that just came out today. And of course, we don't expect any university to actually act in that way. But the truth is, we do, you know, as readers, there are underlying biases. And so it's just important to remind your, you know, to be thinking about that, what your students are writing about, you know, how that's looked at by the admissions reader. It doesn't mean there's never a place to talk about you know, mental illness right now. Reina mentioned this morning, teenage girls are really liking to write about anxiety. We're seeing a lot of those essays now. It's kind of becoming a kind of overwritten about topics. So I want to move on here. We have questions for, a question for Aamir. I'm gonna jump down to that section, and if we have time, I'm gonna come back to you, Reina. But Aamir, how can we best work with students within our various high schools to get them started on their essays? How do you do that in your role?
Well, actually, it's important that you start off early. Ideally, starting in grade 9 is the best way, where you can help make personal files for the students. Why that's important is because a lot of times when they're in grade 11 and 12, they've actually forgotten what they've done in grade 9 and 10. And that could be something which is important, and that could be shown in their essay. So it's important that you start early, you start in grade 9, start making their personal files. We start with something called as Who Am I? We do a SWOT analysis with them. This also opens up the child understands that what am I exactly, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, and what things I need to work on. And then going forward in grade 11, you can start making them write their brag sheets. Brag sheets are just topics that, you know, the best things that they've done in their entire life. It could be as early as their earlier years, which is grade 4 or 5, something which would have triggered their passion. We had a child whose passion was in arts, and that passion actually triggered in grade 4 because he just thought that he wanted to do something where there was less of structure and more of creativity. And so the essay actually came out from there, that how his journey actually started in arts from grade 4 onwards. So it's important that all those small stories can just be written down, and then with the counselor, the child can sit and what to write in the essay, what to mention, and how to form that story. And then, as Sandeep mentioned, for US, you have to be careful about also writing about why choose that particular university or choose that particular major. So the student also needs to research on their majors and the university, about the university. You can't just write an essay that is completely focused on yourself. It has to also be about what course or major they're going to do in their high school. So these are some of the things that we do at school that help the student.
Thank you. Reina, from your perspective at Prompt, is there anything that you could add about how you go about helping students get started?
Oh, getting started? Again, I think it is about brainstorming and trying to get the student focused on what stories will display their qualities. And again, I think lots of brainstorming helps because students will, when they want to tell a story about themselves, this really applies to the Common App, the main US situation, they will think about maybe the biggest possible story or the most dramatic possible story, and they'll overlook what's part of their daily lives and what connects to their passion. So those smaller stories, one of the essays that I, for some reason, will never forget was about a student's love of building model airplanes. And it was a really compelling story that even though it didn't directly relate to the major he'd chosen, showed all of the qualities that were going to make him successful. And when it comes to getting started, I do think that talking with them and giving them that plan and being able to sit in a room with them, having these, a lot of our clients have these getting started workshops where everybody sits in a room and they all write together. That can really kick them off and get rid of a little bit of that anxiety.
Yes, I think doing that brainstorming session in grade 11 really helps. And then in the summer break, you can expect them to, make their first drafts. That can be really helpful. Also, as Reina said, that these small stories can actually be beneficial because a lot of times students forget these stories and they start writing about things that they've done in grade 11 and 12, as in they become house captains or school captains, and which actually doesn't make much of a difference because they've not done much in that particular role, or they've been part of the school football team or basketball team, but they haven't taken that forward. But these small stories actually have made an impact in their life and made them what they actually are. So that can be.
They want to go for they want to write about the thing that gave them the gold star, the recognition, and they overlook what shows who they are. And you have to remind them, your gold star is on your activities list, it's on your resume, it's in your marks. This is about something extra.
We're going to move into a short discussion here about relating to something that is a challenge for anyone who has ever worked with a student on a college essay, and that's how much help is too much. I'm going to give this question to Aamir here. How should we talk with students and parents about having the students write the essays? How can we convince them that it's in their best interest to do it themselves?
Yes, that is something difficult. That is something that happens a lot. You have students also writing stuff which is not theirs. So a lot of schools use plagiarism softwares and then we also do sessions with them telling them about that, see, what you are, you're the best person to tell about that. No third person is going to tell you or write for you what you are. So it's important that you write it yourself. You have to, being school, it can be a little easy because you can talk about ethics. School is about ethics. That's most of the schools would have the ethics as their pillar or in their value system, and so you just have to tell the parents that see, it's about the value system. And also an essay it's not about, the language can always be improved, but the content has to be of the student itself. The child just has to know who he is and just has to write about himself. So that's about it. And you know, just simple conversation where you have those one-on-one sessions with the parents and the students. Just talk about this to the parents and the child themselves, and I think they do understand. You might have some odd cases, but then you have to learn to tackle them.
Reina, can you talk? Oh, sorry, go ahead. Sandeep?
Just to add to Aamir's point here, I think the other really interesting thing to understand is that how reachable universities are for students. So most of the exhibitions which start for the UK essentially around November, that's a safe time for a lot of students and school counselors and high school sort of people who support students to write essays to come and meet universities and actually have detailed discussions. And it's always worth writing a draft and carrying it for an exhibition while you're coming for a personal discussion. And because it's November or Jan and the sessions actually start in the UK in October, we have plenty of time to maybe skim and scan through it and offer advice. So that's the other thing I think which is worth mentioning.
I just want to add one thing, that it's really important that the student's individual voice is coming through in that essay. It's okay for a student's essay to sound like they're not a native English speaker when they're not a native English speaker. That's what we're expecting as admissions readers. We want their grammar to be correct, but we're not looking for a native English speaker to make a non-native English speaker's essay look native. Yeah. Okay, we're going to have questions at the end. We will leave at least 10 minutes, so please keep your questions, and we will get to them. Reina, this next topic, the student has now developed a draft. Now what?
Excellent. So this actually connects to the topic we were just talking about really well, because we, in our process, try to combine giving the student the most help that we can give them with giving them total ownership over the process. Because during the feedback process, you can't let that unique voice be squashed. And sometimes, like harsh feedback that is too dictatorial will make the student, crumple up and maybe give up and not want to keep going and not feel as if they're in control of the process. So that's another thing that I think relates to celebrating their voice is something that does help them understand that they're the ones who should be writing the essay, and that can be part of the feedback process as well as the pre-writing process. So one of the things that is really unique about the way we provide feedback that I think is super helpful, and it's not a trade secret, we actually give seminars to all of the counselors who work with us so that they can learn more about how we provide feedback and use it as much as they want, is we separate content from structure. And in the first draft feedback, we really focus on content and structure together, but in separate sections, and we save line level, sentence level, and grammar feedback for later in the process. And this is because we are very frequently asking students to do a lot of new writing, to do major restructuring, and to write new things, and this can be harsh sometimes, cut what they've already written. And if we go through and correct all of the grammar and make them work on polishing everything that they've already written, it's a mixed message, right? And at the beginning of the process, we don't want them worrying too much about, oh, is my diction elevated enough? Is my grammar perfect? We want them to be focused on that content. So that's the first separation, right? Content and structure first, and worrying about the sentence level feedback later. And in this first, we always think of like the first round of feedback as the most important. That's when we make our big asks. If you look at the topic and we think, the student needs to refocus, sometimes entirely, that's when we make that ask. That's when we might ask them to come up with a new introduction. That's when we might ask them to expand one line from their essay into 2 paragraphs, right? Because they're not necessarily writing about the right thing. Maybe sometimes they're just telling one story and there's no reflection, and you have to make them reflect and you have to get them to restructure, and sometimes they're just writing abstractly about their philosophical views and you have to have them come up with stories. So this is always a little bit easier to convey, like the way we do this first round of feedback with a visual aid. But we have a free seminar if you want to look at it, and then we'll have the pictures of it. It's at promptessays.thinkific.com/courses/IC3. So we put that out for you guys to look at it and learn more about what I'm talking about. But in that first round of feedback, we start by giving the student an overview of how we see them based on their essay. And that's really important because the student isn't yet thinking of how they're coming off, usually, right? You want to give them a mirror and say, when I look at your essay, this is who I see. You're always very positive about this, right? We try to portray the most positive version so that they're feeling encouraged as they go along, but we still need to give them a little reflection of this is what's coming out. And then we talk about the main problem and what we're going to do to fix it. Then in the content section, we do brainstorming questions that are specific to the essay topic that they've already decided on, so that we're getting them to just write and think more about the particular topic, right? So they've brainstormed before they wrote the first draft, and then we make them do it more. And then in the final section, then we actually give them an outline to show them where we think that content might end up going. And we always present it as an option or an example to help them see how it might work, because we really want them to have ownership of the process. And once that's done, usually the second draft, you'll need to be filling in those holes. You know, there'll usually be a little bit more content that's added. And then third draft, that's when we get to the sentence level feedback. Once we know that everything that the student has written is already telling a story, and then we can polish everything that we know we're going to keep.
And I think it's important to mention that that's quite a process in doing that. And in my work, I meet with a lot of domestic counselors in high schools in California, Washington, and what I found is that they're telling me they work sometimes 5 to 7 hours with one student providing that kind of feedback that's needed. That's what competitive high schools are needing to give to their students. So we understand it's a lot. It's a lot that's expected of you as counselors. We do have here about 12 more minutes, and I do feel like there's going to be some questions that have come up during this session. Please feel free now. You can raise your hand. We can bring you a mic to make it easier.
Good morning. How important do you think it is for the students to base their common application essays on common application essay prompts? Every year, Common Application publishes essay prompts. There are 7 of them, I think, right? And one of the prompts is free. They can write on any topics of their choice. Is it necessary for counselors to encourage students to follow the prompts? Thank you.
I don't think it is that important at all. And the reason why I say that is when we're working with students, we won't have them start with the prompts. We'll have them start with that brainstorming process, and then as it evolves, the prompt that fits best will become obvious.
Yeah, it's definitely more important, the final piece, how well that's put together, how well that helps us better understand the student, rather than which prompt they've chosen. I think the paper airplane example, that one's really stood out in Reina's mind. That was an example of a great essay, definitely probably not done off of one of those prompts. Other questions? Yes.
Hi, I just like to know that is there any tense or any first person, second person, how should they write that essay? That is somewhere where most children struggle with.
First person.
And why? Could you give us a little?
There are very rare, most of the essay prompts sort of demand first person, right? And some prompts don't. Maybe University of Chicago prompts don't, but when I get a student who is writing something that's very intellectual and they're using third person, I usually try to guide them to put more of themselves in it, because even if it's very intellectual and it's about their intellectual passion, you still want to have them be present in it. And sometimes that is as simple as using first person. Instead of, sometimes they'll say, have you ever got the student saying like, everyone in history does X, or they'll say something philosophical, and you'll say, instead say, I think that everyone in history does X, the present of the thing.
Thank you. There was a question in the back. I just want to make sure I get you there.
I appreciate your comments about how the students really need to own the content of their story and their essays. I was wondering if you could give some commentary about editing support that, let's just say, people in their vicinity may offer, or support assistance to really work on the polishing of the story, because the content would be owned by the student completely, but there could be varying degrees of assistance provided in the final editing. You know, this word versus that word. You know, I was wondering if you could give some comments on your thoughts about that level of kind of final polishing support.
I think one of the things which I've sort of, as a personal example, also seen is that students, not just the school counselors, but teachers, so English teachers, and the teachers who've actually known them and taught them can be great mentors. That's I think an immediate support system they can tap into, and that's really useful, because a lot of these teachers understand the journey of a student. I think the other support system which they can actually tap into, like I was saying earlier, are high school delegates, so university delegates. But then I think the hack there is again to contact them early in the cycle, so a couple of years in advance, because they can sort of sit down. A lot of high school delegates are reachable, and it's definitely worth sending them a draft over, and if you can get on a Skype or an email, copy a parent in, then a lot of university delegates understand that the student's really serious about his journey of admission. So I think those are certainly two of easily accessible options.
I think that just polishing it grammar-wise, or just by the language, correcting the language, that is not a problem at all. Even in schools, you have the English teachers or the counselors helping the students with that. So I don't think that is a problem. All three of us mainly emphasize on the fact that the story should be of the student. It should not be that, because a lot of times people did face, the universities did see that from one particular school they had essays which were all similar in nature. They all did they all did the same thing. So their story should be original. Rest, I think, the polishing, the language skills, the grammar, everything can be helped for the student, as in it can be polished.
Hello.
Wait, so I think Reina wanted to
Yeah, and I would agree with that, but I do think, for me, the line is, if it's a grammar issue, I try to make it a teaching moment, because this is one of the things we always talk about. This is when they're most motivated to learn to write well, so we can teach them at this time, and that means they're going to be more prepared in college. And then where I feel like I draw the line is sort of putting words in the student's mouth. If you don't think a word is great, you can say, this word means this. Are you sure that's what you want to say? Maybe you should have a simpler word, but you don't want to say, I'm crossing this word out and putting a different one, because then all of a sudden the voice starts to go away.
We had a question here.
Yeah. Morning. I would just like to ask that when we were talking about the content of the essay, the content is the part where you're focusing on. So does the content, it differs from, according to the universities, the courses being offered by the universities. Is there any particular difference that we need to emphasize on when the children are writing for essays for US and UK universities? The content, is there any particular difference that we need to focus on? Or should the content focus on the drive and what are the 5 things that you have mentioned?
So I think, of course, the content differs, because UCAS requires you to write a single essay which goes to 5 universities, and for the US you have to write more number of essays. So by default, the level of detail which is covered for US universities will be much higher. A lot of UK universities will also require scholarship essays, because they've started offering scholarships. So the kind of detailed essays which they are using for US universities can be used for the scholarships. but essentially, in terms of, I think the bigger difference would be the length of these essays, the focus towards a particular university and the course. But I think what's really important is if a student is applying to 5, because I'm a UK expert, so sort of drawing an example from that, if a student has a short list of 5 universities, and if he's seen the modules of all of those 5 different courses which he's applying to these 5 universities, that can be a great inspiration, because those modules will have anchors in the curriculum which he studied in school, and that can be a perfect link to form content.
Yeah, US, it takes a lot more time for students in the US to write essays, I think, in general, because there's just a lot of them. The average student writes 7 to 10 different essays. I had a question back here, yeah.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am. I would like to know that what are the accommodation for students with dysgraphia? Because I would like to know, because they are having difficulty, their writing skill is compromised. I'm a college counselor and also I'm a special educator. I'm from Kolkata, St. Augustine Day School. So what are the, because they are very intelligent, few of my students, and they speak very well. So what are the accommodation for those students whose writing skill is compromised? Is there any software or anything that in Strand we can help them? So I would like to know. Thank you so much.
I think a lot of universities are cognizant of the fact that they need to support students who come from different backgrounds, diversity, and challenges. So often we've seen universities also interviewing students where to compensate for a lack of essay. But I mean, those examples aren't really common in the US, I think. But where I think wherever a university feels that they need to know more, and they should give a student, they should give the student a chance to sort of portray what is it that they want to do. They will get on an online interview. So I think my advice would be to do the best job possible, and it's always worth sending an email over as a counselor, and worth highlighting through an application that the student's happy to give a portfolio or an interview or a writing sample.
That might be a great thing to include in the letter of recommendation. If you're writing that, you could mention the student had a great challenge and that process. I think we have time for one more question here. We have a
Sandeep, you had mentioned that UK universities are offering scholarships. So I'm not aware about any universities offering scholarships to international students. So I would really want to know if there is, and what's the process, because there is only one UCAS application, and there is one common personal statement which goes to all the universities. So I mean, if there is scholarship and there is separate essay, I mean, what's the process of applying? Because I've not come across this, yeah.
When you're doing, when the student has a shortlist in hand, it's worth checking out the website, and most of the scholarships are written clearly on the websites. Have over the last couple of years, they've become user-friendly. So it's worth getting in touch with the international office of that particular university and asking them about a scholarship.
Yeah, the same. I'm not aware about that, and I mean, I've spoken to so many university officers from UK, and they've all mentioned that for international students, they do not have any scholarship. So I would really want to know if there are. I mean, I could.
I think on an average, it revolves around a 20 to 25% for the first year. At Essex, for example, we have a £4,000 scholarship. They need to submit. It's a merit scholarship, and all of these other universities, and not not just Essex, but actually most of these universities would like a better quality student to come at a great undergraduate grade, and that's the inherent reason why I think scholarships are important. Also, it's a competitive market, so we are competing with a lot of really good US universities, and and we are again conscious that higher education, that university education is expensive. So, well, happy to take the discussion outside the room and give you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been great. We are out of time, but a couple things. Reina will be in the expo hall. Prompt does have a booth. So if you just have questions about essays about anything we talked about today, please stop by and talk with her. Also, she mentioned that URL, but I know it was hard for you to hear that. So she also has that there. You can go get information about that free kind of a counseling webinar that they do for counselors, completely free. And I hope to see you as well. If you have any questions, I'd love to talk to you afterward as well. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining our session today.
Thank you very much. Thanks.